Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Hello. Hope everyone is doing well today on another exciting day here at Miami Book Fair. Welcome to the 32nd anniversary of the Miami Book Fair. I'm Crystal Lewis, and I'm one of the volunteer room hosts for today, and I am a member of Miami-Dade College, and we're delighted to have you here with us this afternoon. If you've looked through the schedule of events for today, you'll see that there have been and continue to be many venues and author sessions running today and tomorrow. There are also activities in Children's Alley and programs in the Swamp and the Porch and more. There's quite a bit going on. Please consider becoming a member of the Friends of the Book Fair. Your charitable contribution will support this wonderful book fair, and Friends receive multiple benefits such as preferential seating. Oh, that's a cool benefit, and admission to special book fair events. We greatly appreciate our friends. Now this year, you supporting the fair is easier than ever. You can text BOOK to 501-501 to donate $10. You will receive a text back asking to confirm your donation, and you can simply reply yes. We're also grateful to our sponsors, who include the Knight Foundation, OHL Arellano, and the Batchelor Foundation, and so many more that are listed on the signage and materials throughout the fair. Miami Book Fair certainly does not end today or tomorrow, and Miami Book Fair programs, events, and activities actually take place throughout the year here and all over Miami. We are grateful to Miami-Dade College and the hundreds of volunteers, thank you volunteers, that make this all possible. There will be a brief question and answer after the discussion, and our guests will be autographing books immediately after the session just outside of this room to the right. And now I would like to kindly ask that you silence your cell phones and any electronic devices so there will be no interruptions. Here to introduce our special guest is my new friend here, Mr. Patrick McGinn. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Patrick McGinn. I'm a local lawyer here in town, and I'm also a retired Metro-Dade or Miami-Dade homicide detective. And it's a special opportunity for me to get to introduce our guest today. First, I'd like to introduce Mark Bernier. If you listen to Florida Talk Show, you already know who he is. Just let me run down a few comments that have been made about Mark. He's the dean of Florida Talk Shows, says Governor Jeb Bush. He is at the forefront of public policy, says Lieutenant Governor Carroll. Mark is Florida's best informed radio talk show host, says former Florida CFO Alex Sink. I listen to his shows regularly, very informed, and he puts you right in with the political action that's going on in the state of Florida. He's a very good interviewer and goes after the truth and the story at all counts. And it's my special pleasure to introduce Police Commissioner Ray Kelly from the NYPD. And it's special to me not only because I was a former detective from Miami-Dade and I worked several cases with NYPD homicide detectives, but it's also special because I'm someone from the detective or the patrolman rank that gets to introduce one of the people that is the leader of the eminent police department, not only in the country, but in the state, with a command of, I think it's 35,000, Commissioner?
Uniform.
35,000 uniform officers. That's extra special for me, and I'm pretty sure the last time I was this close to a boss, I was getting chewed out for something, and the commissioner has yet to yell at me, so I'm doing pretty good. I'm sure everybody knows who Ray Kelly is. He really needs no introduction at all. 43 years with the NYPD, coming from cadet to commissioner. 25 different commands. The longest serving NYPD commissioner, serving 2 terms, one beginning in '92 and one in 2002, both before and after 9/11. Degrees from Manhattan College, St. John's University, NYU Law, Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. A man I could sit up here and go on for another hour about, but you'll get bored of me, and I'm sure you'd rather have him talk to you. Commissioner Kelly, my absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you again, Commissioner, and good afternoon, everyone. Show of hands, how many people in our audience this afternoon are New Yorkers or from New York? There you go.
All right.
There's your man right
Feel
there.
right at home.
I have to ask you, Commissioner, when we had the chance to visit earlier, vigilance is a watchword for you. From the time you were a young man through your distinguished military career, how many people know the commissioner served in the military in Vietnam and was commanding people at the age of, what, 21, 22?
About that, yeah.
Okay. But you were a victim of crime as a youth. Tell that story. It's in the book.
First, Mark, let me state that I'm very appreciative of you doing this because I know it was sort of a last moment. You didn't actually, you had to be.
Not at all. I love the guy and his service to America. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was about 8 years of age. I was in Central Park with a friend of mine, and we were robbed. We had a group of teenagers that grabbed us, held us around the neck, and took our shoes. And it was a little ignominious walking back, even at 8 years of age, walking home without our shoes. But it did, I think, sort of sensitize me somewhat to victims. It, made an impression on me. You also, we talked before, and you mentioned that when I was about 2, my mother put her purse behind me in a carriage, and someone came along, pushed me forward, took her purse, and she came out running after him. So, I was an early victim of crime.
Yeah, very early. So this gave you an appreciation for what happens to people and why policing in America is so important. So you end up going to college, and then you go into the military. Is it during this time from your youth through military, do you get a sense that you would like to be in policing, or does that come later?
What happened is I needed a part-time job to go to Manhattan College to pay my tuition. So I was working in Macy's. My mother had worked in Macy's and got me this job as a stock boy. You can't use that term anymore. It's politically incorrect. But I saw an advertisement for the first police cadet program in America, actually. It came out of the Adam Walensky was a Kennedy administration person. They designed this program, and it was started in the NYPD. I went there as a part-time job, and I just fell in love with it. It was exciting. I was in the communications division, and just all the emergencies and all the things going on in the police department throughout the city of probably 7 million people in those days all came into this location. So, and it fascinated me, and I think that's how I certainly started to get hooked by working there. What started as a part-time job just to have money was really turned into a sort of a calling.
How important is a good college education? Because I think that you want now, every police officer should get a 4-year degree. Am I correct?
I agree. In the book, I talk about that. The job has become much more complex, much more demanding than it was certainly when I started. And we require virtually every teacher in America to have a baccalaureate degree, and that's fine. But we give police officers awesome power, literally the power of life and death. And again, it's spotty throughout the country as to what the requirements are, but very few require a 4-year college degree. And I think it's needed in this day and age because of so many different things that police officers have to handle, including the terrorist environment that we find ourselves in.
We're going to have you ask your question, start thinking of your question, and during this exchange we'll have you step to a microphone and you'll be able to ask your question directly of Commissioner Kelly. That's coming up. But first, I know what's on everybody's mind is a contemporary issue. In vigilance, you address doing the right thing by people and justice, but also protecting us and keeping us safe. 2 terms as a commissioner, and in that unique position in the early 90s, then asked again as in the introduction in 2002, was there any hesitation when your city called you back for a second time as to whether you would take the assignment?
There wasn't. There should have been, probably. But there wasn't. I had known Mike Bloomberg slightly. And, of course, 9/11 happened, and I felt, as I write in the book, I felt that I had something to contribute, and I was sort of out of the game. So he asked me the day after he was elected to be police commissioner, and I really had no hesitation. It was a very critical moment, I think, in the city's history, and I wanted to be part of it. We knew we had to do something more than had been done. The city had been attacked twice successfully, almost 3,000 people killed in New York. We wanted to, at the very least, assist or supplement what the federal government was doing, and we did that by bringing in experts from afar, brought in military people. David Cohn was someone who had spent 35 years in the CIA as the only person in charge of operations and analysis, brought David in to help reform our intelligence operation, which quite frankly was not really an intelligence operation until David came on board. So as a result of sort of bringing those folks on, a whole lot of other people expressed a desire to come into the department. We were able to get analysts from the top schools in the country, Harvard, Yale, the service academies, and we ultimately assigned people overseas in 11 cities as listening posts and tripwires for New York City. We did a lot of things that a conventional police agency had never done before.
A central theme of this book is leadership. Is leadership something, Commissioner, that is instinctive within people, or something that you can acquire a talent to be good at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you can learn it, and I talk about it in the book. I say that virtually everything I learned about leadership, I learned in the Marine Corps at an early age, even though I was in it for 30 years. The thing that stayed with me was the leadership traits. And their approach is that, hey, if you look like a leader, if you sound like a leader, you act like a leader, you're a leader. And I think they trained it very well. 14 leadership traits that I actually look at every day. I have a little black book, my organizer, and I have it as the divider. And just some of them are, justice, judgment, dependability, bearing, unselfishness, loyalty, knowledge, courage, and each one of those, of course, has lots of explanations with it. But it's something that I think they taught very well. And yes, to answer your question, I think leadership is certainly learned and doesn't come down from on high.
I think many of you probably know and would read, those of you who do not know, that the Commissioner was asked to take the stage twice, at least twice, maybe more, on the national level to head up the FBI once, and then a couple of years later, Senator Schumer in New York had asked this, later to be Homeland Security Chief. He passed on both. We end up learning about Louis Freeh at the FBI as a result of that. You said no, but it couldn't have been easy. Why did you say no to those things?
Well, the first time I was asked about the FBI, it was just a couple of months after the first World Trade Center attack. I was a product of the police department. I came up to the department and I got to the pinnacle. I was number 2 person, first deputy commissioner, and then police commissioner. I was only in the job a couple of months. Mayor Dankins had selected me. He was running for re-election. I thought I owed him something to stay with him. It came too soon in a way. I wanted to enjoy the position of police commissioner, and it was premature in my mind. But Louis Freeh was a great selection, a great pick.
There are some people who are wondering about the contemporary issue, so it's on everybody's mind in this room, the ongoing debate as to whether we allow Syrian refugees to come into this country until we can prove that it's safe. How do you think that should be handled? There are governors with the pushback. 36 say no. The president says yes. What do we do?
Well, this is a federal decision. The governors understand are voicing their concern, and people are concerned. My own view is that the process should be slowed down significantly. I think we want to uphold our American values. I think you can do a reasonably good job of vetting. It's going to take time, though. So the process, I think, needs to be slowed, but also perhaps additional resources brought to bear in doing the examination. Now, the president talked about, or the president's person, David Rose, said that the CIA, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center would all be involved in this examination. So let's see what the product is.
Congressman Peter King of New York said that it would take a year and a half to vet everybody who wants to come in. Is that an exaggeration, or do you think it might be right?
It may be right. Peter King is a friend of mine. I have great admiration for him. It may be right, but at this juncture, at this point in time, hey, so be it.
Okay. The the issue is a sensitive one, too, because of America's greatness and allowing people to come in. But we live in a different era. We think about this even more than the first time you were commissioner. It was a different time. When Mayor Dinkins asked you to serve, what were you facing at that time when you were coming in? Do you recall?
Well, we had crime had increased. Actually, it started to go down. But in Mayor Dinkins' first year, there were 2,245 murders, which was the highest number I think any city has ever had. It wasn't the highest necessarily proportionally, but it was a very, very high number. So I came on board in '92. This was in 1990. There was an issue of crime. There was also an issue of corruption. There was a major case involving a group of police officers in East New York that I had to address and sort of reform our internal investigation capacity. And then, of course, after I was on board, we had the first World Trade Center attack. But it was a full plate. And I just want to say, the last year of the Bloomberg administration, we had 333 murders. The lowest we ever had, since we started recording them in New York City. The lowest number of shootings that were ever recorded. And the lowest number of shootings by police officers of civilians, even though the population from 1990 to 2013 had gone up over 1 million. So New York population was about 8.4 million people. So we've had increase in, I think that shows a pretty dramatic and successful story for the city.
A few nights ago, you were in Gainesville. You were in a debate with Al Sharpton. And part of reaction already. And there was discussion about stop and frisk. And you've maintained, Commissioner, through all of this, that you believe that it saves black lives, correct?
Yeah, I think it does. And the fact that it's been virtually abandoned in New York City, I believe, is one of the reasons why crime has gone up in New York. I'm talking about murders and shootings, even though the administration is, doing backflips trying to make it look like the numbers are okay. Crime is up significantly, those crimes, and it's up in the poorer neighborhoods. In the Bloomberg administration, there were almost 9,500 fewer murders than there were in the 12 years prior to Michael Bloomberg. Part of it the Giuliani years, part of it the Dinkins years. And if history is any guide, those lives saved for mostly young men of color. That's who's getting shot on the streets of New York and other major cities. So, yeah, it is a tool that every police officer should have in his toolkit. It certainly has met constitutional muster. Terry versus Ohio case in 1968, Supreme Court case. It's codified in every state in the union. And the lawsuit that was brought in New York was just a miscarriage of justice. The question was never adequately answered by the trial. What constitutes racial profiling? How do you determine if in fact it's going on? You're functioning in, let's say, an all African American precinct. How is the racial profiling going on there? So I reached out to the RAND Corporation, been around for over 100 years. I asked them, what is the proper formula to determine whether or not racial profile is going on? They said, first, it can't be census data because half the stops would be women. It can't be arrest data because your arrest policies may be inherently biased. They said it should be the description given by the victims of violent crime of the perpetrators of violent crime. In other words, government is essentially out of it. In New York City, the description has been for several years of the perpetrators of violent crime, 69% African American. The number of African Americans stopped, and this is the number has been for several years, is 53%. So there is a huge delta between the number stopped and the description of violent crime. The judge refused to accept this evidence and testimony, even though, as I say, RAND is a very well-regarded organization, been around for over 100 years.
Former Florida Attorney General Bob Butterworth, a Democrat, told me in a 1998 interview, if we have specific criteria that shows victimization from a known sector of the population that has been prone to illegal activity, he would have no problem with profiling. He didn't say racial profiling, but profiling, if it was to screen out people who might commit a crime. But he was very narrow in that focus. There were other attorney generals who have felt that way. Is this a debate you think we're going to have for much longer about whether or not profiling can be used? The Israelis seem to do it very well. They use a profile at their airports.
Well, there's a difference between criminal profiling and racial profiling. In criminal
Correct.
profiling, you can, you determine certain
He's
activities.
into criminal profile,
Yeah.
not racial.
Yeah, well, racial profiling is strictly stopping someone because of their race. And will this debate go away? No, it's going to be around for quite a while. But to the extent that it's been diminished, I think it really puts people at risk, particularly young men of color.
Ray Kelly never stops working. He was named the president of, is it K2?
K2 Intelligence, yes.
Yeah, and you do for the private sector, for private companies, correct?
Correct, yes.
This appears to be, from the Wall Street Journal, a huge growing field. Am I correct?
It is. It is growing. People are concerned about, their own security. Companies are concerned about cyber intrusion, which is a, growing problem. And obviously it puts CEOs and boards at risk. So the board of directors is very much concerned about these issues. So the area, and K2 has just brought on some really outstanding people from the federal government who have been working in cyber for quite a while. They actually have an operation in Israel with their cyber folks that does research and development. So that's a growing area. Monitoring is growing. Anti-money laundering is something they're very much engaged in. So it is a growth industry.
What about the cybersecurity angle of that, too?
It's a big deal. It's a big deal, and unfortunately, it's only going to get worse. It's becoming more and more complex. We have sort of 4 levels of it. We have the state-sponsored cyber invasion, if you will, and you have China, Iran, Russia, certainly major players in that area. Then you have the sort of for-profit groups. They're like Ocean 11 teams that are, a lot of them in Eastern Europe. And they'll scour Facebook and Twitter to try to get some personal information to be able to get into companies, take that information, and then sell it on the dark web. Target is a good example of that. We saw the Sony intrusion. We have hacktivists that do it for political purposes, Anonymous.com. In China, they say they have 400,000 patriotic hackers. They're supposedly volunteers. 400,000. And then you have just hackers who do it for, kids for the most part, for recreational purposes. So it's going to get worse, quite frankly. We as a country can do so much offensively. You can shut down a country. The problem is playing defense, and companies are trying to play defense as best they can. J.P. Morgan now spends about $500 million a year trying to defend their information. An
Wow.
incredible amount of money. There's some legislation in Washington that's been stalled for years. And what it does is it allows companies to share information and give them a certain level of immunity so that their shareholders, their customers don't sue them as a result of sharing this information. This probably has a better chance of passing now than it has in the last couple of years, but it still hasn't passed as yet. There's privacy issues that are still being examined.
We're going to come to the audience in just a moment. Do you buy into, or what's your reaction to when you hear people say, we're giving up too much freedom in the name of security? When you hear that.
Well, I think, it has to be balanced, and I'm concerned about privacy as well. And I'm not really certain what people are talking about. I think the bulk collection in the federal government made eminent sense to me. The president, this administration, has made a decision that your information is safer in the phone company, a private institution, than it is in government. I don't agree with that. What the bulk information did was enable the government to go and see what number had called what number. That's it. It wasn't the ability to listen to calls. There are certain things you can do with a warrant, but this was just what we call in law enforcement a pen register. You put it up to find out what number is calling what number. And to me, I don't think that is a major give up, particularly when the phone company has all this information. They can look at it anytime they want to.
Another contemporary issue, the situation that happened in Missouri played out. We had Baltimore. We've had a few instances in this country. What's your reaction to this? Are the police losing the public relations war, or do you think that the public is coming around?
Well, I think in a short term, the police, the professional policing, has taken a pretty significant hit. So-called Ferguson effect is the result of that. I mean, we've seen you can only call it a murder, the shooting of Walter Scott by police officer Michael Sager in North Charleston, South Carolina. And that was outrageous. And obviously people were justifiably concerned about that. He looked like he dropped evidence as well. And in a lot of people's minds, it's sort of suspicions confirmed. Hey, we finally got this on video. In my over 40 years, I think cops do a great job day in and day out. Are there some bad apples? Of course. In every profession, there's bad apples. Are mistakes made? Yeah, but we ask cops to make split-second decisions sometimes. And, when you make a mistake in policing, it can often cost lives. You make a mistake in business, it costs money. Interesting, in Ferguson, the police officer involved in that, Darren Wilson, was exonerated, was vindicated by the Justice Department in a report of March 4th of this year. Yet that got very little play. He did everything you would expect a police officer to do. Michael Brown's DNA was found on his collar. Michael Brown's DNA was found on his gun. And so what happens? The engagement takes place. The city of Ferguson made just huge mistakes after that. They never put anyone up to put out information. What we have, what we don't have. So they never went on TV to explain what happened until the next day. Who became the spokesman for that event? It was Michael Brown's companion, who, in the report from the Justice Department, said he was lying totally. They left Michael Brown's body on the street for 4 hours. Huge mistake. Those sorts of things. So the problem was compounded by the government in Ferguson. But Darren Wilson was vindicated by the Justice Department. Most people don't know that. They think something really bad happened there. In fact, this officer was fighting for his gun and ultimately had to defend himself and shot Michael Brown.
We're going to motion for anyone to step up and ask their questions of the commissioner. While we wait for our first person from either side, I want to ask, how many people in the audience have watched the CBS crime drama Blue Bloods? Raise your hand. How many of you know it's this guy? How many of you know that he and Tom Selleck were separated at birth? Yeah. I asked
What
you.
happened? He got much taller. Amazing.
I asked you when we first got together today, I said, did they come to you and say, hey, can we do your story? Did they ask you to consult? Because it's you.
No, not really. I was at the premiere. I had some dealings with them early on, but not after that. They've drifted away from
The checks have stopped.
reality.
No checks, though, right?
No checks. Though.
All right, your first. Good evening. See if you could speak right into the microphone and ask your question.
Thank you. Commissioner, you touched briefly on the issues in Ferguson, and it's, of course, spread to Tamir Rice and to Freddie Gray in Baltimore. And then you had the reprehensible murders of the two officers, I believe Ramos and New York City, which appeared to be in retribution to what's going on, the race relations between the police and African Americans in America today. What I want to know from you is, what effect does that have on policing? I mean, I watched the Freddie Gray riots, and you watched the police back down from rioters. what does the current status of race relations between the police and the African American community, what effect does that have on policing in America?
Is it changing the way
there's a lot of
policing is
questions
done?
there. I'm sorry?
Is it changing, in other words, in a general, is it changing the way you police because of that?
Well, it's a couple of issues. I've never seen police officers back away from danger. Never, in all of my time. But I think what you do see as a result of some of these events is a hesitation on the part of police. With the video phenomena, they're concerned about their well-being. They're
Do you
concerned about
welcome
their
cameras,
family.
by the way?
Yeah. And we could talk about that. So I think you see a hesitation. And in fact, the New York Times wrote a story about a month ago saying that shootings are up in 30 cities throughout America. And as a result of this, that's basically the takeaway from the article. And cameras, we could talk about cameras, but Freddie Gray, again, I was shocked when I saw those police lined up in Baltimore. The CVS on fire, it looked like maybe 100 yards away, and they didn't do anything. Now, they didn't do it because they were directed not to engage by the then police commissioner and the mayor, which is absurd, really. Freddie Gray, I don't know what happened in the van. Nobody really knows what happened in the van. As far as race relations today, I think they're strained as a result of some of these videos. But from my perspective, over 40 years in the police department, the relations are so much better than they were. And this is a blip, but certainly it's one that we have to address. In the New York City, when I was there with Mayor Bloomberg, I think we had an excellent relationship with all the communities of color. In the last year of his administration, 2013, the police department had a 70% approval rating, and I had a 75% approval rating. I say that not to brag, but to indicate that there was no schism or divide, as the current Mayor de Blasio, argued in his election campaign. It was a false narrative, but it got him elected. So, kind of long-winded way of answering your question. In terms of race relations, yeah, we have some work to do. I think some of the things you do are you strive for meaningful diversity in police departments. Not easy to do. I think there are ways of doing it, and I think we did do it in New York, because a diverse police department makes the job easier. It's the right thing to do, but if you're reflecting the population you serve, it just makes the job easier. I think we need consolidation of police departments. There's too many of them. In Ferguson or in St. Louis County, there were 50 police agencies in 90 municipalities. There's no ability to advance and to have specialized units there. These things have a direct and perhaps indirect effect on race relations. Cameras, I think the train has left the station. Police are going to have to wear cameras, and you now have the potential of seeing an entire event take place, as opposed to the YouTube events that we see where the police are engaged with somebody and it looks like it starts in the middle of an incident. And it's an opportunity, I think, to get the good work that police officers do out, in a more public way.
Let's go over here. Your question now. If we can be brief because we're short on minutes. Sir, go ahead.
So the issue of targeting surveillance or intelligence on certain communities that did very much in the news this last week. Donald Trump floated the idea of tracking Muslims and making them have special ID cards. And the program that you ran in New York, which focused on surveillance inside a mosque and the Muslim community came about, and the commissioner now said that it was of no actionable anything came out of that program. What is your take on, the specific threats that our nation is facing right now, and the way that we should kind of go after that?
Yeah, let me explain that. We put in a demographics unit to look at the demographics of the most diverse city in the world, New York. And we did that in 2003 because we saw like something that happened in Iraq, where we had 12 suicide bombers come from one town, Teshwan, Libya, and went into Iraq and blew themselves up. So the question was, hey, do we have anybody here that's from Teshwan? And where would they be? And New York is very tribal. And if you're from Moldova, chances are you're living on 2 or 3 blocks in the Bronx and living with other Moldovans, that sort of thing. But so we wanted more granular information. It was never meant to develop leads. It was done in the open. We went and basically did our own surveys, went into coffee shops or whatever and talked to people. And because of the diversity of the department, which now has police officers born in 106 countries, we could do it. We could converse with people. Again, the complaint against it is it never generated leads. And what I've said and say in the book, it's like saying Derek Jeter never scored a touchdown. That's not what he was supposed to do, not what this unit was supposed to do. I can tell you one thing that we knew. If you remember the Boston Marathon bombing, they were the 2 brothers, Tsarnaev brothers. They, when they hijacked that individual's car, they were coming to New York. They said that to the individual whose car they hijacked, and he escaped. Where would they go? They were Chechens. Well, we knew where the 2 Chechen communities were in New York. That's the type of information that we wanted. Perfectly legal. Nobody, there's no reason for government not to know that sort of information. The census data just doesn't get it. So, there's just a lot of misinformation. We never surveilled mosques. We had leads, we had investigations, and we let those leads go wherever they took us. You cannot have a sanctuary. You can't say that we're not conducting this investigation into a synagogue or into a Catholic church or into a mosque because it's a religious institution. Of course not, particularly in this day and age. So the things that we did in New York under my watch, I think were perfectly legal. We had a cadre of first-class attorneys, former U.S. attorneys, a lot of Ivy League attorneys, scrubbing everything that we did. So I'm very comfortable with our efforts there.
We have time for 2 questions. Sir, you're next. Good evening.
You mentioned in the book that when you were in Treasury, 40% of federal law enforcement was under Treasury. And then there's been a lot of reorganization. Now it's mostly Homeland Security. Could you comment on what you think the ideal organization of law enforcement in this country should be? Federal, state, local?
Of the organization?
Yeah, the organization, particularly at the federal level.
I'm not certain Homeland Security is the best organization. It's huge. It's about 270,000 employees.
Well, really?
When I was there, it was housed in Treasury, and it was an effort to get everybody out of Treasury. But quite frankly, they wanted somebody else to handle that problem. The ideal organization, I'd probably have to think about that a bit. It was an effort, but for instance, FBI is in the Department of Justice. DEA is in the Department of Justice. The Secret Service is in Homeland Security. Does that make sense, or should all law enforcement agencies be sort of under the same organization? I want to think about it a little more. See, my experience was with the legacy agencies for the most part. Secret Service, Customs, which I headed. And those relationships remain sound. What we wanted, or what I wanted from Homeland Security was money. And they did come across with money. It's almost as if the reorganization of it, or putting them all in that sort of big tent, didn't really make a difference on the ground. But they did provide resources to the local police departments, and the legacy agency relationships remain strong today, and didn't really change with Homeland Security coming into existence.
One more question. Ma'am, go ahead.
Hi.
Yeah, it's not your fault. It's an old war injury that I have here. I just didn't hear the whole question. I know it has something to do with Mayor de Blasio. One of my favorite subjects, by the way.
Could you give us the synopsis of the?
Sure. I saw my neighborhood.
Just get close to the mic.
Sure. My neighborhood went from very clean and nice to not so nice in the last three years. So I wanted to know, and there's lots of back and forth on whose fault this is and what your opinion was of why this is happening.
Yeah, I think it's a fault of leadership.
Homeless. Is what
Yeah, I mean, I think Mayor de Blasio was not ready for prime time. I think he was surprised when he was elected. He was elected because of a well-done campaign, well configured with his son, and all of a sudden, it's like the movie The Candidate. You ever see that movie? At the end, he says, "Now what do I do?" And it's, a little bit of that. Yeah, there's a lack of leadership. Mayor de Blasio is an ideologue, and what people want is figuratively, the trains to run on time. You have to make certain the streets are clean, that the police are addressing crime, that homelessness that doesn't explode with the way it has in New York. I mean, it just seemed to come out of nowhere after de Blasio was elected. I think one of his problems is, and Mayor Bloomberg had access to really top-notch people. People wanted to work for him and come into the administration. Mayor de Blasio is using a lot of sort of the union folks and people from political clubhouses that sort of traditional politicians do. And I think the quality of leadership in the agencies has been affected as well. So to answer your question, yeah, I think it's a lack of leadership. I don't think the mayor was ready for the job. I still don't think he's ready for the job.
Thank you. Exit question, I'll make it brief. Do you think, Commissioner, that neighborhood watch groups will see a resurgence because of public awareness of what's around us?
Yeah, they may. I mean, neighborhood watch groups really came about when there was no cell phones. It was, and now everybody has a phone. So the sort of the banding together of folks like this, which is a part of it, in a way is no longer needed. Do I think community involvement is good? Absolutely. And it's just harder to get that now. It was actually kind of a social engagement that you had, but now you have people with Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, those sorts of things that sort of they can do it online. But I'd like to see community engagement, but I don't know about neighborhood watch as being certainly as necessary as it was 30 years ago.
Like National Night Out, it became more of a social thing.
That's
as
right,
well.
exactly. Yeah.
The book is called Vigilance. Former Commissioner Ray Kelly will be signing copies of the book right to the rear of the room. Commissioner, thank you for a great interview.
Thank you very much.
And
Mark.
your service to America. Thank you all for attending this afternoon. You take this on the road, call me.